All right. Hi, guys. My name is Mackenzie Lacy. I am part of the Young Greens of Ohio. I'm one of the co-chairs. I will be your host this evening to discuss labor issues within the United States. I'm joined by Austin Bashore, Matthew Hoh, and Debbie Manera. Austin, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Austin Bashore. I am a central committee of the Ohio Green Party, representing the city of Kent. I'm also a member of the International Committee of the Green Party of the United States, Asia Pacific Caucus. And I'm excited to be here to discuss labor issues in the realm of green politics.
Matthew, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Excuse me. I'm Matt Hoh. I'm the Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate here in North Carolina, and it's very nice to be included in this.
And Debbie.
I'm Debbie Manera. I'm with the Ohio Green Party. I'm on the Central Committee. I'm on the National Media Committee, the National Women's Caucus, the Labor Caucus, and the new, we just restarted the Ohio Women's Caucus.
Right, thank you all for joining us. Let's get started. Our first question, how does the United States treat the working class? Matthew, would you like to go first?
Excuse me, terribly. I mean, absolutely terribly. It's been a long history of that, and it's been a history that's been one of exploitation, but also one that's soaked in violence. And the oppression of the working class, the desire to ensure that the money continues to go to the top, to put it in simple terms, is a hallmark of the American political system. Both major parties throughout American history, regardless of which two major parties we're talking about, because they've changed over time, of course, have almost always been parties that have been representative or working for the capitalist class, the owners, the business owners. And so those few exceptions are when they have been pushed. So you see in the 30s and the 40s, the Democrats, some of the things that were implemented that certainly improved situation circumstances for workers, could have been better, but certainly improved it, were done because of political pressure put on the party. And so, I mean, that would be my takeaway coming into this conversation with you guys, is that continual pressure on the political system, because the political system is owned part and parcel and is a part of that business class.
Debbie, would you like to respond to that? You're on mute.
As I pretty much agree with everything Matt said. I worked briefly for 5 months of the last year in Amazon, and having not worked for quite a while, I was really shocked at the conditions and the things that they get away with there. It's pretty sad. Both parties are utterly corrupt, and that's why I'm fairly new at this, so bear with me.
You're good. All right, Austin, how does the United States treat the working class?
Absolutely terrible. As Matthew said, the labor issue in the United States has never come from the goodness of the heart of the capitalist class. They have almost never done that. That's not how the capitalist system works. When we have an enterprise, an economic system that's mainly focused on sheer production for profit, hardly anything when it comes to workers' rights or even environmental rights comes out of the goodness of their hearts. They always have to be pushed. From hiring private Pinkerton militias in the 1920s and 30s to state law enforcement agencies and even the military being sent in to crush the labor movement, they know who has the real power. And they pit worker against worker, military worker against coal miner worker, in order to serve the interest of the ruling class. So they know when we are divided, we cannot be defeated. We can be defeated. But however, in the very few cases where we've actually united against a common cause or for a common cause, it was very hard for them to be able to deny our rights. But however, the labor issue in the United States has always given trinkets when it comes to being ruled by two capitalist corporate parties.
All right, next question. What lessons can we take from other countries that may treat their workers better than we do and apply them to the American working class? Debbie, would you like to go first?
Well, I believe that many other countries, like in Europe, Scandinavia, France, they make a lot more money an hour. France, they get 5 weeks in August of paid vacation. In Scandinavian countries, they get a couple of years of paid leave, pregnancy leave for men and women, and it's the differences are pretty stark. It amazes me how it's like, what is the trigger going to be to get Americans up and in the streets or general strike, whatever? We've become so passive.
Yeah, I agree. Austin, what lessons can we take from other countries that treat their workers better?
I think the United States, when it comes to labor issues, the labor issue in the United States is very apathetic. As Debbie said, there is very little chance of a worker strike in the United States. There are people who, well, a lot of workers are the status quo. We are used to the status quo and we're afraid of anything less. We're afraid of being hurt. We're afraid of losing something. We're afraid of losing our cushy lives in the United States. We can learn from places like Korea, for example, that has the Confederation of Trade Unions in Korea, where they kicked out their last president. They organized enough strikes and they kicked out their last president, well, 2 presidents ago, 2017, 2016. But the main difference is they had a political authority outside of the two-party system. For example, the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions was illegal during the military dictatorships and was only legalized in 1992. And they have opposition political parties in Korea, such as the Labor Party or the Justice Party or even the Green Party. However, we don't have that in the United States. Our labor movement is heavily infiltrated in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party establishments. And the Green Party is the only national left-wing party. So we desperately need to pick up that type of slack and bring about political opposition, because if the ruling Democrat or Republican Party mistreats the labor movement, mistreats laborism, we just have to suck it up and vote for them anyway. It doesn't matter if they smack us around, we have to go back and vote for them anyway. So we desperately need the Green Party for that. I don't see the Libertarians, the only other national party, the Libertarians, becoming a bastion for labor anytime soon. So the Greens desperately need to pick up on that front.
Yeah. Matthew, what are your thoughts to that question?
I think there's positives and there's negatives that can be gleaned from other nations, their experiences. Certainly, the Scandinavian nations, of course, are always pointed to as terms of nations that we can emulate, that have thriving economic sectors that are rated or kept in high regard for their entrepreneurism, for their innovation, and have very solid worker rights, as well as fundamental safety net programs that ensure all people have the ability to not just survive, but to thrive and to prosper. And, I don't want to overstate that, because people from those countries will push back on those things. But when you're comparing them to the U.S., it's a pretty stark comparison, and it defeats the idea that you cannot provide for the common good. You cannot provide for housing, healthcare, education, jobs as human rights without cratering your economy. So the other side of that is the negative side, and as we face more and more extremism, as we face more and more fascism. I was at an event this weekend where the Proud Boys were there. These are very real threats. And the genesis of that, and you can see this in other nations where the working class was pummeled, was kept under the thumb, was brutalized. Working families were devastated. dictated by economic decisions, and that pushed people into the ranks of the authoritative of movements. And certainly, and you can see that now. Looking at what's happening in Europe right now with, say, in Italy, the elections are coming up in Italy, and the far right movement will do well. And a lot of their rhetoric is economic based towards the working class. And so we could take the good and the bad in terms of what we can learn from other nations.
Thank you so much. Next question. So we can highlight some of the positives for our working class. What have been some wins for the American working class? Austin?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of wins that we can focus on, especially here in Ohio with the Starbucks labor unions popping up all around the state. The unionized Starbucks are an amazing example of what people can do when they work together towards a common goal. We have a lot of manufacturing in the state of Ohio, and they're doing a lot of work. The Columbus Teachers Union, that just the national news about the Columbus Teacher Union saying that, hey, our buildings are falling apart. We have textbooks whose the last history section is the fall of Yugoslavia from 1992, 1991, saying we need new textbooks because the kids nowadays need to learn about 9/11 and the Iraq War. Sorry, kids in high school were born in 2003, 2004 now, 2006 in some cases. So they need new textbooks. Buildings don't even have heat in the wintertime in Ohio. It gets like -10, -15 degrees in deep December. So the teachers unions arguing for better working conditions, better pay and stuff in a time when education system is under attack. And I wanted to put in perspective that two of the most female dominated professions, education and nursing, are under direct attack in the United States. Women's workers and the rights of women in the United States is in labor and in just life in general are under severe threats. And it all boils down to a corporation's right to rule over women's and workers' lives. And we need to become that party to stand up for not only women's workers and the two most threatened spheres of work right now, but to become a party of all workers in the United States, to make them feel that they can be actualized in the movement.
I agree. Matthew, what have been some recent wins for the American working class?
I think it's the communication that's been occurring. A lot of it based upon what we're doing here right now, the technology that has brought us to the point where we can coordinate, we can communicate, we can inform one another, educate, we can mobilize this way. I think that's got a lot to do with the successes in the organizing that's been seeing, and in terms of the walkouts, the strikes. I think the coordinated success of, say, the West Virginia Teachers Union, was that in 2018, certainly was something that informed others, and certainly there are other movements too. But you look at it, I think the numbers I just saw the other day were that about this time last year there were about 15,000 people in the U.S. on strike, and now there are 75,000 people on strike this year. So this ability to inspire, to coordinate, a guy like Christian Smalls, right, who sets up the Amazon labor union up in New York. I mean, his ability to be present with people in forums like this, inspire, and certainly a lot of other people doing the same work. I think that's led to a lot of successes that we've seen, and Smalls, right, paraphrasing Joe Hill. Joe Hill famously said before they killed him, don't mourn, organize. Chris Smalls saying, don't quit, organize, and then getting that message out. And so I think that's a really big success of the labor movement in these last several years.
I agree. Debbie, what are some wins for the American working class?
I was going to say the Amazon and Christian Smalls first comes to mind, and seeing someone like Kashama Salant in Seattle. I heard that she was advising him, and he seems like a very put together young man. And having worked at Amazon, I have relatives and friends who work there, and to see some of their attitudes changing, like my niece has made derogatory comments, and some of the other coworkers about the unions, the dues, and this, and I think I got to her and I explained to her, the union is not some foreign entity. The union is you. The union is Crystal and Krista and your coworkers, and I think that finally got to her, and she's changed her tune a little bit. And seeing the groundswell of the left, Greens, is giving me much hope. Yes. I did not know 75,000 people were striking this year. That's wonderful.
Which that leads us to our next question. A lot of people don't think unions are important, as you said, Debbie. Some people think they're terrible or dues are horrible. So Matthew, can you shed some light on how important unions are to the American working class?
Yeah, you know, and I thought about this because Austin was kind enough to send the questions ahead of time, which never happens in these kinds of things. So thank you guys. You know, you guys have your act together much greater than I do, because I saw that and I said, what I should do is get the graph, the chart that shows workers' wages, right, plotted next to unionization rates, and showing how this has been a coordinated effort since the, you know, really, I go back to the Nixon administration, but like to ensure workers' wages are suppressed. And how do you do that? Well, you do that through, and that's all part of the larger financialization policy, strong dollar, you know, shipping manufacturing overseas, relying on imports, pushing credit onto people, that kind of thing. Well, how do you do that? Well, you got to bust the unions. And I mean, I think just that graphic there illustrates the importance of unions. And I think it's something that, you know, what Debbie was explaining just now with, you know, with your family member, was it Debbie?
Yeah, but also some other coworkers and other people I know.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have this demonization that has been so effective, very well done. And I think that's one of the things we have to recognize is the adversary in all this, right? The capitalist class, which Austin, when you're speaking of it, you also kind of said the ruling class. It's one and the same. And you have to, how do we get to this point where we can't have, you know, you go back to, what was it, 47, 48, when Taft-Hartley was passed, right? I mean, this just takes away so much power from unions. All this is coordinated. All this is done with a purpose. We are up against a living organism within the ruling class that wants to keep power and will adjust and evolve. And so the fact that, you know, this isn't a success, but this is something we need to keep in mind, that in 70 some odd years since Taft-Hartley was passed, there has not been a way to counter a lot of those types of what that law did to strip power from unions. And in particular, you hear a lot about general strike. Well, general strike implies that you're going to be doing sympathy strikes or secondary strikes or solidarity strikes, which are outlawed under U.S. law, U.S. federal law, through Taft-Hartley. So it's those kinds of things that we have to really grapple with in terms of how are we going to upend them and give people the power they need within the unions to do the things they need to do to force the hand, right, to get them the basic rights that they deserve.
Yeah. Debbie, can you also speak to the importance of unions?
Well, I think that a strong working class, we have a strong working class because of unions in the past. I grew up with just about every adult in my family who was a union member and had vehicles and houses and put their children through college. And it's just been incrementally since then taking away. And and people associate, I think a lot of the perception is how corrupt some of the unions are, but that's the leaders. They're mostly Democratic. It's not the rank and file. And I see where there are a lot of rank and file committees being formed separate from the so-called leaders. And I actually saw someone running just a couple of days ago, I forget where it was at, that he's actually campaigning on doing away with union leaders and just organizing with just the rank and file.
Thank you.
Having
sorry,
lived in Texas for 25 years, and I found out that collective bargaining is against the law there, and I was shocked. There's just unions are, Texas is another country.
Yeah.
We have the same here in Debbie in North Carolina. It's like you come from the Northeast and then you come down here, and all these things that you think are just fundamental or have to be part of our society because we've gotten to a certain point just aren't, you know. And in North Carolina, we have either the worst or the second worst unionization rate in the country.
There was a teacher got arrested for passing out leaflets to try to unionize one of the school districts in Texas when I was there. Now it was shocking.
That's crazy because Texas is always like don't tread on us, and then they do stuff like that. Texas is definitely another country. Austin, can you speak to the importance of unions?
I think it's absolutely important to be a part of a union. However, I do understand a lot of apprehension towards unions because, as we said earlier, that they are bastions of liberalism. They are bastions of Democratic Party entrenchment. We have had a debate over the usefulness of a labor caucus here in the state of Ohio. In the state of Ohio, the Green Party is one of the only, if not the only state party with a labor caucus. And I think that's very important. That's very good. That's a very good first step. However, we had a large debate that because our caucus system in the Ohio Green Party is only for disenfranchised minority groups or identity groups. We have Black caucus, youth caucus, women's caucus, LGBT caucus, so on and so forth. But we had a large debate. Is labor a disenfranchised group? Is it a disenfranchised minority? And a lot of members, rightfully so, brought up that, no, it's not, because most of these labor unions are ran by liberal Democrats. And they're not disenfranchised because of the union leaders being in bed with the Democratic Party. But I believe that it's time for that fundamental shift away from the Democratic Party to, for the first time in 100 years, to a party that actually cares about labor issues. And I think it's very important for people to work together, because if we don't have class solidarity, the rich people certainly have interclass solidarity. It's about time us workers have it as well.
Which leads me to my next question. Where does the Green Party stand on workers' rights? Austin?
Absolutely, I'm not going to lie that this is something that desperately needs to be improved upon within the Green Party. There's a false, sorry, I was getting feedback through my own headset. There's a false dichotomy that labor and the environment cannot coexist. A lot of business leaders, a lot of policymakers say that if we have environmental rights, we cannot have worker rights. And they also say if we have worker rights, well, then we cannot have environmental rights. But that is a lie. That is one of the biggest lies of the labor movement. That is one of the biggest lies of the environmentalist movement. Labor and environment can coexist, and they have coexisted for thousands of years together peacefully. Only until the invention of modern capitalism have they not been able to coexist. So that's the Green Party, where the Green Party needs to be. And I will admit that we have been lacking in the labor movement.
Matthew, can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's well said, Austin. I mean, when I'm out campaigning and just yesterday, and introducing myself and introducing the Green Party, and it's often when you describe we're pro-worker, pro-working family party, pro-environment, very concerned about climate, and people kind of stumble over that because they have been fed this. We have this narrative, we have this trope that labor and environmental concerns can't coexist, that they are at odds, and that's simply not the case. And I think you look at the Green New Deal as we have in the Green Party, or the real Green New Deal, not what was presented in Congress a couple of years ago. But the idea that we have an economic bill of rights that's included in that, as well as just transition is something that we bring up over and over and over again. The idea that we want to transition the economy and do it in a manner that nobody is left behind, nobody is left out. In fact, they are put into a better place through a just transition. I mean, I think that speaks to where the Green Party should be on this, but it also is something that we have to, as a party, recognize that we can't be a party for our own purposes, and that we have to be something that's part of a larger body, just an appendage within that body. And there are other appendages or other parts of the body, and one of those is labor. And so that we have to understand that it's symbiotic, and that we don't exist for our own purposes, and labor doesn't exist for its own purposes, but it's part of a larger movement trying to facilitate advancement for an entire class. And I think we always have to keep that in mind, that what we are doing here is not for the party, but for the people and for the planet, to add into what Austin was just saying. Yeah.
Yep. Debbie, can you speak to where Greens stand on workers' rights?
I think we have have a little work to do. I think as a rule, everyone is on board, as the party is very pro-worker, pro-union, but in any political party, there's a few people that seem to miss that. I know egos, but the majority of us are standing firm in what the Green Party, because it's really important more than ever, especially with Matthew's campaign that we're all so supportive of. We have to present a united front, and all this bickering behind the scenes and people taking it on themselves to do things without a consensus of everyone else. Yeah, we have a little work to do.
All right, thank you. Last question. What can workers do to ensure they get more rights? Matthew, would you like to start?
It's I mean, the simple answer is strike, right? I mean, that's a simple answer. It's but that gets more complicated in terms of organizing strikes, making sure there's support for strikes. I mean, you talk about strikes that be taken very seriously. You're asking people to take on a burden, to take a sacrifice, and particularly if you're talking about public sector workers or others that may be fired, that's a real challenge. But I think what we're seeing now with labor, I really hope that the railroad workers push back very strongly against this bogus deal that was pushed on them. You see the manipulation of that by the corporate media and by the Democratic Party. This championing of this terrible deal that they wanted the railroad workers to take. I mean, it's that type of strength that needs to be shown. And it needs to be, and that's done through what we were talking about earlier, through the communication, the organization, the mobilizing, the information sharing. That needs to continue. And I would say that's the biggest priority is strengthening those networks so that even though, as you said before, solidarity strikes are illegal, there is at least some form of solidarity that's being displayed that the unions and the labor and the working class can help one another.
Thank you. Debbie, what can workers do to ensure they get more rights?
Organize, and what we're doing here right now, and what I see, I've attended more Zoom meetings in the past year than, like I said, I'm new at this, and I've never spoken publicly before, but organizing, and I'm speaking up. A lot of people are really coming to the fold and starting to speak up. All I can say is organize, and that's like, connecting with people. And just like the railroad strike, the railroad workers, they put out, I don't really watch much of the mainstream media news, but they put out that they have this tentative deal. And then I read the next day that that's not true, that no one's agreed to this tentative deal at all. So yeah, we just have to, our voices to keep them honest and, and raise awareness. It's like strike, a general strike would go so far, but it's going to take time to get there, I guess.
Yeah. Austin, what can workers do to get more rights?
As Matthew and Debbie have said, working together, talking together, striking. However, we do live in a country and purposely built economic system where the majority of Americans are one paycheck away from being homeless, houseless. The majority of Americans have less than $2,000 in their savings accounts. So a lot of people are rightfully concerned about, hey, if I go on strike, I'm going to get fired and I'm going to lose everything. So again, one of the core tenets of the Green Party is some form of universal basic income. And in order to improve worker conditions, it is important for workers to first increase their bargaining power. And if a sufficient basic income is not paid to the workers, then the workers won't go on strike if they are not having their main source of income. If it's their main source of income for their family, their children, for everything, it's very hard for them to find the willpower to go on strike. But if we have some form of universal basic income where at least the electricity bill is paid, or the food bill for the month is paid, or they're guaranteed X amount of basic income so their children can go to school that next month, I think that'll drastically increase workers' bargaining power in the United States. because mostly when I hear about this type of things are people concerned about their livelihood and losing everything because of going on strike in states where they have those types of things where they don't have collective bargaining. So if you go on strike, you're going to get fired. And people easily willing to scab, take the role of those striking workers in a production plant. So yeah, I definitely believe a universal basic income can absolutely assist this type of workers' bargaining power.
Yeah. All right. That is our last question. Again, I'm joined by Austin Bashore from the Ohio Young Greens, Matthew Hoh, North Carolina candidate, and Debbie Manera from the Labor Caucus in Ohio. Thank you. And I'm Mackenzie from the Young Greens as well. Have a great day. Bye.